Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. The thing about Meridian Outpost was that it looked peaceful. Gleaming corridors, soft, ambient lighting, the gentle hum of life support systems working overtime to accommodate oxygen breathers, methane breathers, and that one ambassador who apparently needed an atmosphere that smelled like burnt rubber. From the outside, it was the pinnacle of galactic cooperation, a shining example of what happens when species put aside their differences and agree not to murder each other over trade routes. From the inside, though, it was a powder keg wrapped in diplomatic niceties, and everyone knew it. Amara stood in the security briefing room, arms crossed, trying very hard not to look like she'd rather be literally anywhere else. The holographic display flickered in front of Commander Wren, showing the station's layout in unnecessary detail. He was the kind of man who color-coded his socks, probably alphabetized his food rations, and definitely thought Amara was one disciplinary report away from being fired. He wasn't wrong. The Jalthine and Olmar delegations arrive in 6 hours, Wren said, his voice carrying that special tone of someone who enjoyed PowerPoint presentations. This summit represents 3 years of negotiations. 3 years. If anything goes wrong, we all get vaporized when they start shooting at each other. Yeah, I got it, Amara interrupted, earning a withering glare. If you'd let me finish, Wren continued through gritted teeth. The security protocol requires maximum vigilance. The Jalthine are bringing their cultural attachés. The Olmar are bringing their warrior council. He paused, and something that might have been vindictive glee flickered across his face. And their cubs. Amara blinked. They're what now? Cubs, offspring, children. Wren's smile was thin and absolutely insufferable. 3 of them. Ages ranging from juvenile to barely adolescent in Olmar terms. The parents insist it's a gesture of goodwill, proof they're committed to peace, showing they trust us enough to bring their young. That's either very touching or very stupid, Amara muttered. Someone needs to be assigned to their care and security while the adults are in negotiations. Wren's eyes locked onto her with the precision of a targeting computer. You volunteered. I absolutely did not. You're assigned. Sector 9, the Reinforced Habitat Wing. You'll have full provisions, entertainment systems, and direct access to medical if one of them bites you. He said that last part a little too cheerfully. Dismissed? Amara opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. There was no point. Wren had decided she was getting babysitting duty, and nothing short of a station-wide emergency would change that. She turned on her heel and walked out, already mentally calculating how many stimulant patches she'd need to survive the next rotation. The problem with Commander Wren was that he was technically good at his job. He just happened to think regulations were more important than common sense, which meant he and Amara got along like fire and oxygen in a sealed room. She'd been contracted to Meridian Outpost 8 months ago after let's call it a career transition from military service. The official records said honorable discharge. The unofficial records said she'd told a superior officer exactly where he could store his orders, and the location wasn't anatomically feasible. Freelance security work paid better anyway. 6 hours later, Amara stood in Sector 9, staring at the reinforced habitat that would be her prison for the next 24 hours. Possibly longer, knowing her luck. The space was larger than she'd expected, with high ceilings and walls made of some composite material that could supposedly withstand plasma fire. There were sleeping platforms, feeding stations, and what looked like climbing structures that screamed predator species. Then she heard them. The door to the adjacent transport bay hissed open, and 3 Olmar cubs bounded into the habitat with all the grace of a controlled avalanche. They were smaller than the adults, obviously, but smaller was relative when you were talking about a species that averaged 2.5 meters tall at maturity. These cubs were roughly the size of adult humans, covered in dark green scales that shifted to amber along their spines, with eyes like molten gold and teeth that belonged in a nightmare. The first cub, Gresh, hit the climbing structure at full speed and scampered up it with claws that left deep gouges in the metal. The second, Mola, immediately began investigating everything at ground level, her forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. The third, Thin, locked eyes with Amara, and made a sound that was probably curiosity, but sounded disturbingly like hunger. "Right," Amara said to absolutely no one. "This is fine. Everything is fine." An adult Olmar, presumably a parent, ducked through the doorway. Even stooped, the warrior stood nearly 3 meters tall, scales darker and more scarred than the cubs. When it spoke, the translator in Amara's ear rendered the growling clicks into flat, emotionless, galactic standard. "You are the guardian assigned to our young." It wasn't a question. Amara straightened, trying to look more competent than she felt. "That's me. I'll keep them safe." The Olmar studied her for a long moment, and Amara had the distinct impression she was being evaluated as both a protector and a potential meal. Finally, the warrior nodded slowly. "They are curious. They will test boundaries. Do not let them harm themselves." A pause. "Or you." "Comforting," Amara muttered. The warrior departed, and the door sealed with a pneumatic hiss that sounded way too much like a coffin closing. Amara turned to face her charges. All 3 cubs had stopped what they were doing and were now staring at her with unnerving intensity. "So," she said brightly, "who wants to hear about station regulations regarding unauthorized climbing?" Thin tilted his head. "What is climbing unauthorized?" "Climb where you're not supposed to." Gresh, still perched on top of the structure, called down, "We're not supposed." Amara pinched the bridge of her nose. It was going to be a long night. The first few hours weren't terrible, which made Amara immediately suspicious that the universe was saving something worse for later. The cubs spoke galactic standard, with the halting grammar of youngsters still learning, which meant conversations were an adventure in creative interpretation. Gresh was the bold one, constantly testing limits and seeing how high he could climb. Mola was curious, taking apart a supply container within 20 minutes just to understand how it worked. Thin was the quiet observer, watching everything with those unsettling golden eyes. They were also, Amara gradually realized, absolute menaces. "No, you can't eat the furniture. I don't care if it smells interesting." "Mola, put that down." "Gresh, get off the lighting fixture right now or so help me." "Thin, why are you staring at me like that? Stop it." Feeding time was an experience Amara would need therapy to process. The station had provided appropriate Olmar nutrition, which consisted of something that looked like raw meat, smelled like raw meat, and was definitely raw meat. The cubs tore into it with enthusiasm that bordered on violent, and Amara tried very hard not to think about the fact that Olmar were obligate carnivores and she was made of meat. After the feeding frenzy, things calmed down. Marginally. The cubs sprawled across the habitat in various states of contentment, their bellies full and their energy finally flagging. Amara sat on one of the lower platforms, checking her datapad for updates on the summit. "Guardian Amara," Thin said suddenly, his voice quieter than before. She looked up. "Yeah? Why you smell like fear?" "Oh, good. They could smell emotions. That wasn't terrifying at all. Amara considered lying, then figured honesty might work better with a species that could literally sniff out deception. Because you three are apex predators, and my instincts are reminding me of that fact. Mola lifted her head. Apex predators. Top of the food chain. Natural hunters. You know, scary. Gresh made a sound that might have been a laugh. You think we scary? You have claws that could gut me, and teeth that could take my arm off. Yeah, you're scary. The three cubs exchanged glances, and then something unexpected happened. They moved closer, forming a loose circle around Amara's platform. Not threatening, but protective? We not hurt you, Mola said firmly. You our guardian. That means pack. Pack protects pack, Gresh added. Then simply nodded, those golden eyes somehow less predatory than before. Amara felt something uncomfortable twist in her chest. Great. She was getting emotionally attached to alien children who could accidentally kill her by playing too rough. This was definitely not in and a her job description. All right, she said, clearing her throat. How about we make a deal? You three don't eat me, and I'll make sure nothing else does either. Sound good? Good, all three said in unison. The night shift started at 2200 hours station time. Amara's relief was supposed to arrive at 22:10. At 22:15, her comm chirped with a message that made her want to scream into the void. Scheduling conflict. Relief delayed until 0600. Sorry, Ren. Scheduling conflict, Amara read aloud, her voice dripping with disbelief. That absolute. She caught herself before finishing that sentence in front of the cubs. That means I'm stuck here all night. Stuck with us? Mola asked, sounding worried. No, not stuck like that. I just meant… Amara sighed. Never mind. Looks like we're having a sleepover. The cubs perked up at that. What is sleepover? And because Amara's brain was already running on fumes and spite, she found herself explaining human sleepover culture to three alien predators who hung on every word like she was describing forbidden magic. The station's artificial night cycle dimmed the lighting to a soft twilight, and Amara discovered that Olmar cubs had approximately zero interest in sleeping when there was a strange human to interrogate instead. They wanted to know everything. Why humans only had one heart. Why she didn't have claws or proper teeth. Why her skin was so soft and scaleless and fundamentally unsuited for survival. Evolution took different paths, Amara explained for the third time, suppressing a yawn that threatened to crack her jaw. We developed tool use and cooperation instead of natural weapons. Sounds weak, Gresh observed, though his tone was more curious than insulting. Tell that to the species we've outcompeted. Amara checked her chronometer and felt her soul leave her body. 100 hours. She'd been awake for 32 hours straight thanks to a double shift yesterday and this unexpected marathon. Her eyes felt like sandpaper, and her thoughts were starting to get fuzzy around the edges. Tell us human stories, Thin demanded suddenly. About your pack. I don't really have a pack anymore, Amara said, then realized that was way too depressing for children. But I can tell you stories about humans in general. You want scary stories or adventure stories? Both. Mola bounced excitedly, her tail thumping against the floor. So Amara, running on nothing but stubbornness and the dregs of her last stimulant patch, started telling them sanitized versions of human mythology. She told them about knights fighting monsters, about explorers crossing oceans into the unknown, about people doing impossible things because someone told them they couldn't. The cubs listened with rapt attention, occasionally interrupting with questions that proved they were actually thinking about what she said. This human in story, the one who fought the giant? Gresh said. He was small like you? Smaller, probably. Humans come in different sizes. But he won anyway. He won anyway. Used his brain instead of strength. Tricked the giant into defeating itself. The cubs went quiet, processing that. Then Mola spoke up, her voice uncertain. Guardian Amara, why our parents brought us here? To this place. There it was, the real question lurking under all the excitement and bravado. Amara sat up straighter, trying to gather her exhausted thoughts into something helpful. Because they're trying to make peace with the Jalthine, and bringing you 3 shows they're serious about it. It means they trust that you'll be safe. But what if peace doesn't work? Thin asked quietly. What if the Jalthine still want to fight? Smart kid. Scary smart. Amara chose her words carefully. Then your parents will handle it. That's what adults do. They deal with the complicated stuff so you 3 can just worry about being cubs. You worried, Mola observed, her tongue flicking out. Smell worried all night. Damn their predator senses. I'm always a little worried. It's part of my job. I worry so you don't have to. That seemed to satisfy them, or at least redirect their attention. Gresh climbed onto the platform beside her and curled up, his body heat radiating like a small furnace. Mola followed suit, and Thin settled on her other side. Within minutes, they were dozing, the rise and fall of their breathing creating an oddly peaceful rhythm. Amara allowed herself to close her eyes for just a moment. Just a moment to rest them. That's all. The explosion snapped her back to consciousness with the subtlety of a plasma grenade. The entire habitat shook, alarms screaming to life with a sound designed to wake the dead. Emergency lighting flooded the space in harsh red, and the cubs jolted awake with startled snarls. Amara was on her feet before her brain fully processed what was happening, adrenaline dumping into her system and temporarily overriding the exhaustion. "Stay here," she commanded, her voice sharp with authority. "Don't move!" She lunged for the comm panel on the wall, slapping it active. "This is Amara in Sector 9. What's happening?" Static. Then Ren's voice, tight with controlled panic. "Armed insurgents, Jalthine radicals. They've breached the diplomatic wing. Multiple explosions. All security personnel respond to—" The transmission cut off in a burst of interference. Amara's blood turned to ice. The diplomatic wing was 3 sectors away. If the attackers knew the Olmar delegation brought their cubs, and if they wanted to make a statement. She pulled up the security interface on her data pad, fingers flying across the screen. The habitat's door controls showed green, still locked, but that wouldn't matter if someone had override codes. She scrolled through camera feeds from the surrounding corridors, and her stomach dropped. 4 armed figures, definitely Jalthine by their distinctive avian profiles, moving with military precision toward Sector 9. Toward them. "Okay," Amara said aloud, her voice unnaturally calm. "Okay. Change of plans." The cubs had gone absolutely still, their predator instincts recognizing danger in her tone. Mola's pupils had narrowed to slits. Gresh's claws extended, scraping against metal. Thin's lips pulled back from his teeth. "Listen to me very carefully," Amara said, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "Bad people are coming. I need you 3 to go into the supply closet, the reinforced one, and stay there until I come get you, no matter what you hear. Understand?" "We can fight," Gresh growled, and he meant it. Even young, even untrained, Olmar were born warriors. "I know you can, but I can't fight and protect you at the same time. I need you safe so I can do my job properly." She grabbed a storage container and started shoving emergency supplies into the reinforced closet, her movements quick and efficient. Medical kit, ration packs, a backup comm unit. Please, trust me. The cubs hesitated, then Thin nodded slowly. We trust Guardian Amara. They moved into the closet, and Amara sealed it behind them, engaging every lock and security protocol she could access. The door was designed to withstand decompression events. It would hold. Now she just had to make sure nobody got close enough to try opening it. Amara took stock of her resources, which was a depressing exercise. One standard-issue plasma pistol with maybe 30 shots. A tactical baton that felt woefully inadequate. Her own exhausted body and a brain running on fumes. No backup. No reinforcements. The attackers had clearly planned this during the summit, specifically because most security would be concentrated on protecting the delegates. They hadn't counted on a babysitter with nothing to lose. The habitat's main door beeped, someone attempting an override. Amara grabbed the nearest movable object, a feeding platform, and flipped it on its side for cover. She yanked power cables from the entertainment system and started rigging them across likely entry points. They wouldn't do much damage, but they'd slow someone down, maybe give her a targeting opportunity. The override failed. Someone cursed in the corridor outside, the words translated as decidedly impolite suggestions about Amara's ancestry. Then, the cutting torch came out. Sparks showered through the door seam as the attackers started burning through the lock mechanism. Amara steadied her breathing, sighted down the pistol, and waited. The exhaustion was still there, pulling at her like gravity, but adrenaline held it at bay. For now. The door shrieked open halfway, immediately caught on the emergency brake system. A figure pushed through the gap, weapon raised, and Amara fired twice. The first shot went wide, her hands shaking more than she'd like. The second caught the attacker in the shoulder, spinning them back into the corridor with a screech of pain. Return fire scorched the air above her head. Amara dropped flat, rolled behind her makeshift barricade, and fired blind toward the door. The plasma shots were bright enough to leave after-images in the dim emergency lighting. "There's only one of them!" someone shouted from outside. "Press forward!" Only one. Yeah, just one extremely tired human standing between trained killers and 3 cubs who couldn't defend themselves. The universe had a sick sense of humor. A second attacker pushed through, and this time Amara was ready. She triggered the power cable trap, sending a jolt of electricity through the metal floor panel. The attacker convulsed and dropped, weapon clattering away. Amara scrambled forward, grabbed the dropped weapon, and now she had 2 guns. Things were looking up. Sort of. If you squinted and ignored the overwhelming odds. The next attacker was smarter, tossing in a flashbang before entering. Amara closed her eyes just in time, but the sound still felt like her skull cracked open. Disoriented, she fired both weapons toward the door, holding down the triggers until they clicked empty. Something heavy hit the floor. How many were there? She'd seen 4 on the cameras, 1 down from her trap, at least 1 wounded. But they'd have reinforcements, and she was one person with limited ammunition and unlimited exhaustion waiting to drag her under. Her comm crackled to life. "Any personnel in Sector 9, respond." Amara grabbed it, taking cover as another spray of weapons fire chewed through her barricade. "This is Amara. I've got the Olmar cub secure, but hostiles are breaching the habitat. I need backup now." Backup is engaged throughout the station. Hold position. Elite Olmar Guard has been notified. ETA unknown. "Well, that's just fantastic," Amara snarled. She was on her own. Story of her life. The attackers regrouped, their voices carrying through the damaged door. They were planning something, coordinating. Amara used the momentary lull to check her remaining ammunition, reload what she could, and accept a fundamental truth. She was going to have to get creative, or they were all going to die. She looked around the habitat with fresh eyes, cataloging everything that could be weaponized. The climbing structure, the feeding stations with their pressurized delivery systems, the environmental controls, the storage containers. Yeah, she could work with this. Amara started moving. The next attacker through the door walked straight into a pressurized stream of Olmar feeding supplement that hit him in the faceplate like a fire hose loaded with liquefied steak. He went down screaming, clawing at his helmet, and Amara used the distraction to put a plasma bolt through his weapon. It exploded in a shower of sparks that sent his companions diving for cover. "Who designed this security?" one of them shouted in frustration. "There's supposed to be minimal resistance." "Minimal is relative," Amara yelled back, then immediately regretted announcing her position as return fire chewed through the wall above her head. She rolled left, came up behind a support pillar, and triggered the environmental controls she'd spent the last 2 minutes reprogramming. The habitat's temperature dropped 10 degrees in as many seconds. Not enough to hurt anyone, but enough to make the air conditioner units scream in protest and flood the space with a thick mist as warm moisture condensed. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Amara knew this habitat. She'd spent hours in it. The attackers didn't. She moved through the artificial fog like a ghost, using the climbing structure's metallic frame to mask her thermal signature. One attacker stumbled past her position, weapon sweeping through empty air. Amara brought her tactical baton down on the back of his knee with a crack that sounded wet and wrong. He collapsed, and she was already moving before he hit the ground. 2 left. Maybe 3. She'd lost count between the adrenaline and the sleep deprivation that kept trying to drag her under. Her shoulder throbbed where she'd taken a grazing hit earlier, the fabric of her uniform singed and stuck to burned skin. She'd deal with it later, if there was a later. "Fall back," someone commanded from the corridor. "Regroup and use the plasma charges. Blow the whole section if we have to." That snapped Amara back to full alertness. Plasma charges would breach the habitat's reinforced walls, and while the supply closet might survive, the blast would flood the space with superheated gas. The cubs would cook alive even if the structure held. Not happening. Not on her watch. She accessed the station's security system through her data pad, her fingers clumsy with exhaustion and blood loss. The habitat had emergency protocols designed for decompression or fire suppression. With a few creative modifications to the activation parameters, Amara triggered the foam suppression system. Jets of fire-retardant foam erupted from ceiling nozzles throughout the habitat and the adjoining corridor. The attackers, caught mid-retreat, were instantly buried under expanding clouds of the stuff. It wasn't designed to be a weapon, but it worked beautifully anyway, gumming up their weapons and helmets and generally making their lives miserable. She heard frustrated cursing, the wet sounds of people trying to dig themselves out, and used the opportunity to activate the emergency bulkheads. Heavy blast doors slammed down across the corridor access points with a boom that shook her teeth. It wouldn't hold them forever, but it bought time. Amara slumped against the wall, her legs suddenly unreliable. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her shaking and dizzy. She'd been awake for nearly 40 hours now. The human body could only take so much, and hers was sending increasingly urgent messages that she was about to hit a wall. She triggered her comm. "This is Amara in Sector 9. I've temporarily contained the hostiles, but they're going to breach again." Where is my backup? Static. Then, Olmar guard ETA, 15 minutes. Hold. Position. 15 minutes. She could do 15 minutes. Probably. Maybe. If she didn't pass out first. The supply closet's comm panel beeped. Guardian Amara? Thin's voice, small and scared. We hear fighting. You okay? I'm fine, she lied, pressing her hand against the shoulder wound and trying not to look at how much blood was soaking through. Stay put. Just a little longer. You smell like hurt, Mola said, because of course they could detect that through a reinforced door. And very, very tired. I've been more tired, Amara lied again. She hadn't. This was easily top 3 worst states she'd ever been in, and the other 2 involved active combat zones and confirmed concussions. Liar, Gresh said, but his tone was almost affectionate. You good liar, but still liar. Despite everything, Amara laughed. It came out slightly unhinged, but genuine. Yeah, okay. I'm really tired. But I've got this. I promise. The blast doors shuddered as something heavy impacted them from the other side. The attackers weren't giving up. Why would they? They'd committed to this assault, and turning back now meant failure and probably execution by their own leadership. They'd keep coming until they succeeded or died trying. Amara pushed herself upright, swaying slightly. Her vision was doing interesting things, the edges going soft and fuzzy. She still had 1 working plasma pistol with maybe a dozen shots left. The habitat was trashed, her improvised defenses were exhausted, and she was running on biological fumes. Time for the universe's worst ideas, brought to you by sleep deprivation and spite. She started dismantling one of the remaining storage containers, pulling out the power cell that ran its refrigeration unit. The cells were technically safe, designed with multiple redundancy systems to prevent catastrophic failure. But if you bypassed those systems, shorted specific circuits, and generally treated safety regulations as polite suggestions, the blast door shrieked as a cutting torch bit through the reinforced metal. Sparks rained down, painfully bright in the dim emergency lighting. Amara worked faster, her hands steady despite the trembling in her arms. She'd done this before, in training exercises that assumed you'd been captured and needed to create a distraction for extraction. She'd never actually planned to use the technique outside of theoretical scenarios, but life had a way of making you improvise. The makeshift explosive was crude, unstable, and probably violated a dozen station regulations. It was also the only card she had left to play. Amara set it near the blast door with a jury-rigged proximity trigger, then retreated to the far side of the habitat, taking cover behind the thickest structural support she could find. Her comm crackled. All personnel, Olmar Guard has entered Sector 7, proceeding to threatened areas. 2 sectors away. So close. Amara just had to hold on a little longer. Her vision swam, exhaustion pulling at her consciousness like a riptide. She bit down on her lip hard enough to taste blood, using the pain to stay focused. The blast door fell inward with a screaming crash of tortured metal. 3 attackers pushed through immediately, weapons up, moving with the coordinated precision of military training. They swept the habitat, searching for targets. They found Amara's surprise instead. The explosion wasn't large by military standards, but in the confined space of the habitat entrance, it was devastating. The shockwaves slammed through the room, and Amara felt it hit her cover like a physical blow. Debris pelted the walls. The attackers' screams were mercifully brief. When the ringing in her ears subsided enough to hear, Amara risked a look around the support pillar. The entrance was a smoking crater. 2 attackers were down and definitely not getting up. The third was crawling away, leaving a blood trail, no longer a threat. She'd done it. She'd actually held them off. Amara tried to stand and discovered her legs had other ideas. She made it halfway upright before her knees buckled, and she went down hard, catching herself on her hands. The world tilted sideways, her vision tunneling down to a narrow point of light. "No," she muttered through gritted teeth. "Not yet. Stay awake. Just stay awake." Her body, having endured 40 hours of wakefulness, multiple combat engagements, blood loss, and an explosion at close range, politely informed her brain that it was no longer taking requests. The exhaustion she'd been fighting crashed over her like a tsunami, dragging her down into darkness. The last thing Amara heard before consciousness left entirely was the sound of heavy footsteps and someone shouting in the Olmar language. Either the guard had arrived or the attackers had reinforcements. Either way, she was done. She slumped against the barricade, her body finally claiming the rest it desperately needed. The plasma pistol slipped from her nerveless fingers and clattered across the floor. Her last coherent thought was a drowsy hope that someone would remember to let the cubs out of the closet. Then, nothing. The Olmar guard burst into Sector 9 expecting a massacre. What they found instead was a scene that would be dissected by military analysts for months afterward. The habitat entrance was destroyed, decorated with unconscious attackers in various states of disrepair. Improvised traps and defenses covered every surface. Foam suppressant coated the walls. The environmental systems were completely reprogrammed. And in the center of it all, slumped against a makeshift barricade with a pistol at her feet and blood on her uniform, was one unconscious human who'd apparently decided that overwhelming odds were more of a suggestion than a reality. General Marth, commander of the elite Olmar Guard, stood in the doorway and tried to process what he was seeing. His tactical assessment subroutines kept insisting this wasn't possible. One human, alone, against a trained assault team. "Check for survivors," he ordered, his voice carrying the growl of command. "Find the cubs." His warriors spread through the habitat with practiced efficiency. One approached the unconscious human carefully, checking for vitals. "She lives, General. Wounded, but stable. Exhaustion, primarily." Another warrior located the supply closet, following the sound of young voices calling for their guardian. When the door opened, 3 cubs spilled out, completely unharmed, and immediately tried to rush to Amara's side. The warriors gently restrained them. "Guardian Amara kept us safe," Thin said, his golden eyes wide. "She fought them all, wouldn't let anyone through." "She promised to protect," Mola added. "Kept promise." Gresh simply nodded toward the destruction surrounding them. "She is Pack." General Marth moved to stand over the unconscious human, studying her with the analytical eye of a career warrior. Small by Olmar standards. No natural weapons. Bleeding from multiple wounds and clearly pushed far beyond reasonable limits. And yet, she'd held this position against impossible odds, because 3 cubs needed her to. "Get medical here immediately," he commanded. "This guardian has earned our attention." The medical team arrived within minutes, their instruments scanning and stabilizing before Amara even began to surface from unconsciousness. When she finally clawed her way back to awareness, the first thing she registered was that she wasn't dead, which was surprising. The second thing was that everything hurt, which was less surprising and significantly more annoying. "Easy," someone said in accented galactic standard. "You are injured, but stable." Amara's eyes focused slowly, landing on a medical technician who appeared to be some species she didn't recognize. Scaled, but more serpentine than the Olmar. Behind the technician, the habitat was crowded with armed warriors, all Olmar, all watching her with expressions she couldn't quite read. "The cubs!" she croaked, her throat raw from smoke and shouting. "Unharmed," a deep voice rumbled. General Marth stepped into view, and Amara's exhausted brain registered that he was easily the most intimidating individual she'd ever seen. His scales were darker than the others, marked with scars that told stories of violence survived. "Thanks to you, human." "Just doing my job," Amara muttered, trying to sit up. Pain lanced through her shoulder, and she gasped, abandoning the attempt. "Your job was to supervise cubs during routine diplomatic proceedings," Marth said, and there was something almost like amusement in his tone. "Your job was not to single-handedly repel a coordinated assault team using improvised explosives and environmental systems weaponization." "Yeah, well," Amara closed her eyes briefly. "They didn't give me much choice. The cubs were scared. Someone had to keep them safe." "Guardian Amara!" 3 young voices shouted in unison, and suddenly the medical technician was trying to prevent 3 enthusiastic Olmar cubs from trampling their patient. They crowded around her, careful of her injuries but radiating relief and excitement. "You survived the fighting," Gresh said, as if there had been any doubt. "You kept us safe, like you promised," Mola added, her tail swishing with agitation. "We heard everything, the explosions and the weapons and you fighting." Finn simply pressed his forehead against her uninjured arm, the Olmar gesture of familial affection. "Told you she was pack," he said to the assembled warriors. Amara felt something catch in her chest. She'd been operating on adrenaline and desperation for so long that she hadn't really processed what she'd done. She'd just reacted, putting herself between danger and 3 kids who needed her. The fact that those kids happened to be alien predators who could accidentally kill her with a clumsy hug hadn't really factored into the decision. "Yeah," she said softly, reaching up with her good arm to awkwardly pat Finn's head. His scales were warmer than she expected. "I guess I am." Commander Wren arrived approximately 10 minutes later, looking like he'd sprinted through 3 sectors and was deeply regretting his life choices. He stopped in the habitat entrance, took in the destruction, the Olmar guard, the cubs clustered protectively around Amara's medical gurney, and his face did something complicated. "Amara," he said, and his voice was strained. "What exactly happened here?" "Insurgents tried to kill the cubs. I stopped them. Then I took a nap." She paused. Not necessarily in that order for that last part. One of the Olmar warriors made a sound that might have been a laugh. Wren looked like he wanted to argue, couldn't find grounds to argue, and settled for rubbing his temples like he had a headache the size of a small moon. "The assault was coordinated across multiple sectors," he said finally. "Radical Jalthine faction trying to derail the peace talks by eliminating the Olmar delegates and their families. They failed, largely because someone—" He looked at Amara pointedly. "Someone decided that standard defensive protocols weren't aggressive enough." "Standard protocols assumed backup would arrive," Amara countered. "When backup got delayed, I improvised. You turned a habitat into a war zone. I kept 3 cubs alive in a war zone. There's a difference." Marth stepped forward, and his presence was enough to make Wren fall silent. "Commander, this human performed with honor and courage far beyond what duty required. She faced trained warriors alone and defeated them through cunning and determination. In Olmar culture, such actions carry weight." "I'm sure they do, General, but—" "She is recognized as guardian to the cubs by right of protection." Marth's voice carried absolute finality. "This is not negotiable. It is law." Amara blinked. "Wait, what?" "The guardian bond," Finn explained helpfully. When someone protects Olmar young from mortal danger, they become family. Pack. It's sacred. Super sacred, Gresh added. Like, you can't undo it. You're stuck with us now. Forever, Mola said cheerfully. Amara looked from the cubs to Marth to Ren, trying to determine if this was some kind of exhaustion-induced hallucination. I'm sorry. I think the blood loss is affecting my translation. Did you just say I accidentally adopted 3 alien children? Not adopted, Marth corrected. Guardian bond. You are responsible for their welfare and training. They are bound to honor you as family. This is our way. I was just doing my job, Amara protested weakly. You went far beyond duty, Marth said. You earned this honor whether you sought it or not. Ren looked like he wanted to object, then clearly thought better of arguing with an Olmar general about cultural law. Fine, whatever. Amara, you're getting a commendation for this, maybe several, and probably a formal reprimand for the unauthorized use of explosives. We'll figure that out later. He turned to leave, paused, and looked back. Good work. Try not to blow up any more of my station. After he left, the medical technician finished treating Amara's wounds and declared her stable enough to move. The cubs refused to leave her side, which made transport interesting. General Marth accompanied them to the medical wing, where Amara was assigned a private room that quickly filled with Olmar warriors wanting to pay respects to the human who defended their young. The cubs' parents arrived an hour later, and Amara tried very hard not to look terrified as 2 fully grown Olmar warriors entered her room with expressions that could have meant anything from gratitude to murderous rage. She needn't have worried. The mother, whose name translated roughly to stands in storm, knelt beside Amara's bed and placed her clawed hand gently over Amara's. You protected our children when death came for them. There are no words in any language sufficient to express our gratitude. The father, breaks the line, simply nodded, his golden eyes bright with emotion. You are guardian now. This means you are family. Our burrow is your burrow. Our hunt is your hunt. Our honor is your honor. I really was just doing my job, Amara said, feeling completely out of her depth. Anyone would have— No, Stands in Storm interrupted gently. Not anyone. Most would have fled or surrendered when faced with such odds. You stayed, you fought, you bled. This is the nature of guardianship. This is why the bond is sacred. The cubs had climbed onto the bed despite the medical staff's protests, curling around Amara like scaly heating pads. Thin was purring, which Amara hadn't known Olmar could do. It sounded like a small engine idling. So what happens now? Amara asked, still trying to process that her life had apparently taken a hard left turn into territory she hadn't anticipated. Now you recover, Marth said from his position by the door. The summit will continue. Peace will be negotiated. And when you are well, you will find that 3 young Olmar will be following you around this station like loyal shadows. Fantastic, Amara muttered, but there was no real heat in it. She looked down at the cubs, who were watching her with absolute trust and affection, and felt something warm settle in her chest. She'd spent so long keeping people at a distance, maintaining professional boundaries, avoiding connections that could be used against her. And now she was apparently pack. 2 days later, Amara was cleared for light duty, which meant she was mobile enough to discover exactly what General Marth had meant about loyal shadows. The cubs followed her everywhere, to the mess hall, where they insisted on eating at her table and explaining Olmar dining customs, to the security offices, where they charmed even Ren's administrative staff, to the observation deck, where they pressed their faces against the viewports and asked endless questions about human space exploration. Wren found her there, watching the cubs point out constellations to each other in excited Olmar. "Your life just got very complicated," he observed. "Yeah," Amara agreed. Then, surprising herself, she smiled. "But maybe complicated isn't so bad." The cubs turned, saw her smiling, and immediately rushed over to include her in whatever discovery they'd made about the stars. Gresh was talking a mile a minute about navigation. Mola was theorizing about human ship design. Thin just leaned against her side, content to be near his guardian. Amara had come to Meridian Outpost looking for a simple job, something quiet, routine, forgettable. Instead, she'd found herself in a firefight, defending 3 alien kids with nothing but spite and improvised weapons. She'd passed out from exhaustion while the battle still raged. She'd woken up to find herself bound by sacred law to beings who could accidentally kill her with a hug. And somehow, impossibly, it felt right. "Come on," she said to the cubs. "Let's go find some trouble to not get into." "Can we climb the ventilation shafts?" Gresh asked hopefully. "Absolutely not." "Can we reprogram the gravity in Sector 5? "Why would you even think of that? No." "Can we convince the commissary to give us extra rations?" Amara considered. "Maybe. That one we can negotiate." The cubs cheered, and Amara let them pull her toward whatever chaos they'd dreamed up next. Behind them, stars wheeled through the viewport, silent witnesses to the galaxy's strangest adoption story. Somewhere in the station, Commander Wren was probably developing new regulations specifically because of her. The summit continued its delicate dance of diplomacy. The Jalthine radicals were in custody, their plot foiled by one exhausted human who'd been too stubborn to quit, and Amara, walking through the corridors with 3 predator cubs orbiting her like moons, discovered that family didn't always look like you expected. Sometimes it had scales, and claws, and the unsettling ability to smell your emotions. Sometimes it happened because you were too tired to know you were supposed to fail, so you just kept going until you won. Sometimes the universe handed you exactly what you needed, wrapped in the absolute last package you'd anticipated. She was okay with that.